When Jesus, was gone forth in the way, there came one running. Now, each word here is very important. Running and kneeled to him.
If you have to go take it down there and drop it off and stick it under the door or something, you get that tithe in that church, you get that offering in that church, and then you go home.
For years, millions have watched Pastor Kenneth Copeland preach messages about faith, miracles, and financial blessing. But today, something feels different. Behind the packed conferences, worldwide television broadcasts, and the lifestyle that has drawn both admiration and criticism, quiet changes are raising serious questions. Is one of America's most influential televangelism empires entering a new chapter? What is happening inside the ministry, and why are so many people suddenly paying attention? Stay with us as we uncover the story unfolding behind closed doors, a future few expected and even fewer are willing to talk about. For years, Kenneth Copeland built a public image of confidence, bold faith, and complete certainty. Whether he was preaching to a packed audience or speaking on television, he came across as a man who believed he had discovered spiritual truths that could help people overcome almost any problem. But over the last few years, a number of events have caused even some loyal supporters to pause and ask difficult questions. One of the biggest turning points came in 2024 when Copeland suffered a ruptured appendix. The sudden medical emergency required surgery and several hospital stays, forcing him to step away from public appearances for a period of time. For most people, a health emergency like this would simply be seen as an unfortunate part of life, but Kenneth Copeland has never been viewed as an ordinary public figure. For decades, he has been known around the world for preaching about faith, divine healing, and God's protection. His sermons have often focused on believing without doubt and speaking words of faith over every situation. Because of that, news of his hospitalization quickly became a topic of discussion far beyond his own ministry. Many critics were quick to point out what they saw as a contradiction between his teachings and what people were witnessing. After recovering, Copeland returned to reassure his audience, explaining that his faith remained strong throughout the experience. Even so, many viewers noticed a visible change. At 89 years old, the preacher who once filled stages with endless energy appeared weaker and more physically limited than he had in previous years. Whether people wanted to admit it or not, the effects of age were becoming harder to hide. Then another event quietly added to the growing conversation. In 2026, Copeland agreed to a rare extended interview. Instead of sitting down with a journalist known for asking challenging questions, he chose a relaxed setting with a friendly interviewer. That decision caught the attention of many observers who wondered whether the environment had been carefully chosen to avoid uncomfortable topics. Behind the scenes, changes were also taking place inside Kenneth Copeland Ministries. More leadership responsibilities appeared to be shifting back to family members, especially his son, John Copeland. For a ministry that had depended for decades on one central personality, discussions about who would eventually take over became increasingly difficult to ignore. Another statement from Copeland also continued to attract attention. For years, he has publicly said that he expects to live until the age of 120. It is a belief he has repeated on multiple occasions. But as time moves forward and health challenges become more visible, many people have begun asking how that expectation fits with the realities now facing both the man and the ministry. Still, aging and leadership changes tell only part of the story. Away from television cameras and conference stages, the Copeland family has gone through painful personal losses that have led some people to ask even deeper questions. Those difficult moments would leave an impact that the ministry could never fully move beyond. Personal losses that raised more questions. While public attention remained focused on leadership, finances, and controversy, another issue quietly followed the ministry wherever it went. It had nothing to do with private airplanes or organizational decisions. Instead, it centered on one of the ministry's most important messages. For decades, Kenneth Copeland taught that unwavering faith and confident belief could change impossible situations. Millions of viewers were encouraged to trust that God's healing and protection were available through strong faith. But real life often presents painful moments that challenge even the deepest convictions. One of the saddest tragedies came in 2021 when the Copeland family lost their young great-grandson, Clark Mayer, in a drowning accident. The heartbreaking loss received far less public attention than many of the ministry's other headlines. There were no major televised conversations examining the tragedy, and very little public discussion addressing the difficult questions that naturally followed. For many observers, the silence surrounding the event became almost as noticeable as the tragedy itself. Just 2 years later, the extended family experienced another painful loss. In 2023, Marty Copeland passed away. Although she had been divorced from John Copeland for several years, many longtime followers still remembered her through the family's health and wellness work. Her passing became another emotional chapter for a family that had long been associated with messages of blessing and prosperity. These events were not the only personal struggles the family had faced. Back in 2018, John Copeland's highly publicized divorce had already brought unwanted attention to the ministry. Beyond the personal impact, the separation also sparked questions about his future leadership role and how the organization would eventually move forward. Looking across the family's history reveals something that many people can relate to. Like countless other families, the Copelands have experienced heartbreak, loss, divorce, disappointment, and seasons of hardship. For critics, however, this created a difficult question. If the ministry's teachings promised victory over life's greatest struggles through faith, why did the family itself continue to experience many of the same painful realities faced by everyone else? That question became one of the biggest sources of growing skepticism among former supporters and ministry watchdogs. Rather than fading away, those concerns became louder as public attention increased. Eventually, everything reached a moment that many people still remember today. A reporter confronted Kenneth Copeland directly with questions that many others had been asking for years. The cameras captured an exchange that quickly spread across the internet and became one of the most talked about moments of his public life. They did not stay hidden for long. Questions about Kenneth Copeland's lifestyle and the way his ministry handled money were starting to appear in major news outlets. As public interest grew, people wanted clear answers about where the ministry's wealth was coming from and how it was being used. One of the biggest moments came in 2019 when investigative journalist Lisa Guerrero from Inside Edition decided to investigate the questions that had followed Copeland for years. Her focus was simple but controversial. She wanted to understand the ministry's fleet of private jets and how those expensive aircraft had been paid for. Her search eventually led to a private airport in Branson, Missouri, where several of Copeland's planes were reportedly based. What was expected to be a normal interview quickly became a tense confrontation on camera. Before long, the footage spread across television and social media, attracting millions of viewers. At the center of the investigation were several luxury aircraft, including a Cessna Citation Bravo, a Cessna Citation X, and a Gulfstream V that reports said had been purchased from filmmaker Tyler Perry. News reports also claimed the ministry had asked supporters to contribute millions more for hangar renovations and aircraft upgrades. For many donors who had been encouraged to believe that even a small financial gift could bring God's blessings, those numbers raised difficult questions. But the debate over private jets had started years before. During an earlier television appearance with fellow televangelist Jesse Duplantis, Copeland defended the use of private aircraft. While explaining his reasons, he suggested that flying on commercial airlines could expose ministers to negative spiritual influences. Those comments surprised many viewers and quickly became one of the most discussed moments of his ministry. Although the conversation on that program sounded relaxed, the message behind it stayed with the public for years. So when Lisa Guerrero finally met Copeland at the Branson airport, she brought up those earlier remarks, expecting him to explain what he had meant. Instead, the interview took an unexpected direction. When Guerrero asked about the comments that had already been broadcast on television, Copeland immediately denied making them. His response was confident, even though recordings of the interview already existed. For many people who later watched both the old footage and the new interview, the difference between what had been said and what was being denied became one of the most memorable parts of the encounter. Rather than easing the tension, the conversation became even more uncomfortable. As more questions were asked, Copeland often shifted the discussion or answered in ways that avoided the issue. At one point, he even tried to make the situation more friendly with personal gestures, leaving viewers uncertain whether they were watching a serious interview or something else entirely. When Guerrero asked directly about the cost of the Gulfstream jet and whether donor money had helped pay for it, Copeland responded briefly, saying the subject was not something the public needed to discuss. That short answer quickly became one of the most replayed clips from the interview. For critics, the moment represented much more than a disagreement between a journalist and a pastor. It reignited concerns about financial transparency, accountability, and whether religious organizations should openly explain how donated money is spent. Supporters, however, argued that the interview unfairly targeted the ministry and took Copeland's words out of context. No matter which side people believed, one thing was clear. The video had spread everywhere, and once a moment like that reaches the internet, it becomes almost impossible to erase. The attention did not fade after Branson. In fact, it grew even stronger. Shortly afterward, Copeland's public statements during one of the world's most difficult periods would place him under an even brighter spotlight. His comments about health, spiritual authority, and faith during the global pandemic reached audiences far beyond his own congregation. What had once been a discussion about private jets and ministry finances suddenly became a worldwide conversation. Millions who had never watched one of his sermons before were now hearing his words through television broadcasts, news reports, and viral videos online. As the pandemic continued, the focus shifted again. Financial questions were no longer the only issue. Public attention turned toward Copeland's statements about sickness, healing, and national events, creating an entirely new wave of controversy. Yet government scrutiny had actually begun years before those viral moments. Long before online debates dominated social media, Kenneth Copeland ministry had already attracted the attention of officials in Washington. Instead of beginning with public accusations, the process started with a formal request for financial transparency. In 2007, Senator Chuck Grassley, then serving as a senior member of the Senate Finance Committee, launched a review of several well-known televangelist ministries. The purpose was to examine how donations were being managed, especially for organizations that encouraged large financial giving while promising spiritual rewards. Kenneth Copeland's ministry was one of several high-profile organizations included in the investigation. Letters were sent asking for basic financial information, including leadership structures, executive compensation, and details about valuable assets such as private aircraft. While some ministries cooperated by providing documents, others supplied only limited information or declined to answer certain questions. According to reports, Kenneth Copeland's organization became one of the ministries that drew the greatest concern because investigators believed it had not fully disclosed important details about how it was governed. The ministry's legal organization, Eagle Mountain International Church, responded by arguing that constitutional protections and privacy rights allowed it to withhold some of the requested information. One of the most debated decisions was its refusal to identify members of its internal governing board, keeping the identities of key decision-makers out of public view.
For investigators, that level of confidentiality created new concerns. The issue was no longer limited to financial records. It also involved understanding who controlled the ministry, who approved major spending decisions, and how millions of dollars in donations were being managed behind the scenes. Years later, when the Senate Finance Committee released its findings, the report described an organization with significant financial resources and a complicated internal structure. Those conclusions surprised many observers and added another chapter to the ongoing public debate surrounding Kenneth Copeland Ministries. For years, questions about Kenneth Copeland Ministry went beyond sermons and fundraising. Many people also began looking closely at the ministry's expensive properties, luxury vehicles, and private aircraft. As more details became public, critics wondered where the line was between assets used for ministry work and a lifestyle that looked highly personal.
One detail that attracted a great deal of attention was a large private home connected to the ministry. The property, worth millions of dollars and sitting on a vast piece of land, became a symbol in the larger debate. Along with several high-end vehicles and private jets, it fueled discussions about whether the lifestyle of the ministry's leadership matched the expectations of the people who faithfully donated their money. Former government officials and non-profit specialists who examined the ministry's structure also pointed to another issue. They described the organization as being highly centralized, with much of the authority remaining in the hands of its founding leadership. According to critics, that kind of structure left very little room for independent oversight or outside accountability. The concerns did not stop there. Some former employees later claimed that speaking against leadership could bring serious consequences. They described an atmosphere where questioning decisions was discouraged, and some said they were warned that opposing ministry leadership could lead to financial hardship or even God's judgment. These allegations were never fully settled in court, but they added even more controversy to an investigation that had already drawn national attention. When the federal review eventually came to an end, no official penalties were handed down. Even so, many observers felt the investigation had left important questions unanswered. Instead of ending the discussion, it kept public interest alive and encouraged even more people to examine how the ministry operated. Although government attention slowly disappeared from the headlines, the larger debate never truly went away. The reason was simple. The conversation was no longer just about money, property, or legal documents. It had become deeply connected to the beliefs that shaped the ministry itself. That is where the story takes another turn. To understand why Kenneth Copeland's ministry has remained controversial for so many years, it is necessary to look beyond financial reports and public criticism. The foundation of the discussion lies in the teachings that built the ministry and continue to influence millions of followers around the world. One area that has generated significant debate involves Copeland's teaching about the atonement. In some sermons, he has described the events surrounding Jesus' crucifixion and what happened afterward in ways that differ from traditional Christian teaching. His explanations, including ideas about spiritual events beyond the cross, have been challenged by many theologians and church leaders for decades. Supporters, however, see those teachings through a very different lens. To them, the message is centered on hope, faith, and spiritual victory. They believe faith has the power to change lives, improve health, overcome difficult situations, and even affect financial circumstances. That message of possibility is one of the main reasons the ministry has continued to attract loyal followers despite years of criticism. This combination of faith, strong leadership, and high expectations has helped keep the ministry moving forward for decades. When people believe their faith produces positive results, every success seems to confirm the message. And when things do not go as hoped, many followers see the answer not in questioning the teaching, but in strengthening their faith even more. Still, every long-running ministry eventually faces the same challenge. What happens when an organization built around one influential leader begins to enter a new chapter?
How does it continue when time, age, and leadership transition become impossible to avoid? That question brings us to the next stage of Kenneth Copeland Ministries. As the years pass, public attention is gradually shifting away from past controversies and towards the future of the ministry. Behind the scenes, leadership responsibilities have been changing for quite some time. Family members have stepped into more prominent positions, with John Copeland taking on executive responsibilities, while Terry Copeland Pearsons has expanded her leadership role. Many observers see these changes as part of a long-term succession plan. Kenneth Copeland himself also appears less often than he did during the height of his ministry. Although he continues to appear in selected broadcasts and special events, much of the day-to-day leadership now seems to rest with others inside the organization. Even the ministry's public message has slowly evolved. Rather than focusing only on one individual, it increasingly highlights legacy, future vision, and the continuation of its mission for the next generation. At the same time, independent watchdog groups continue to observe the ministry as this transition unfolds. Their attention reflects an ongoing public interest in how the organization will operate in the years ahead. Now the biggest question remains: can a ministry that has been so closely identified with one man continue to thrive after that leader steps away from the spotlight? Or will the next generation reshape its future in ways no one expects? Only time will answer that question. What do you think about the rise, controversies, and the future of Kenneth Copeland Ministries? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, stay tuned for the next video where we'll uncover another fascinating story that many people have never heard in full.